What we're saying is, and don't ever forget this, academia is the art of understanding more and more about less and less until you understand almost everything about almost nothing. And the emphasis there is on the understanding, not on your ability to be able to collate and collect literature. It's not a question of having a library and a bunch of shelves up here that's just covered in books, although kind of.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Grad Coach Podcast. My name is Derek, and today I'm joined by one of our trusty coaches, Dr. Ethar, and we're going to be talking about the unwritten laws of academia. Whether you're an undergrad just starting out on your academic journey, or a doctoral candidate that's navigating the oftentimes lonely road of academic research, this session will shed a lot of light on how you can optimize your approach and work smarter. So without further delay, let's get this thing started. Dr. E, welcome back to the pod.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, man.
Okay, so let's jump into our first unspoken or unwritten law, and that is that the quality of your thinking outweighs the length of your reference list. Dr. E, there's a lot going on here. What does this mean?
So seeing as we're talking about the secrets that your professors wouldn't tell you, maybe some of them don't even know, we break something down to you that you might not be familiar with. Come here for a second. Come here. Let me explain something to you. All the reading you're doing, all the reading you feel like you should be doing, all of that massive reference list that you're trying to put together by the end of your thesis or dissertation or whatever it is that you happen to be working on, all of it kind of for nothing if you ain't thinking about what you read it. I'll explain. Let me break this down. Don't panic. Don't freak out. The reading still counts, but let me be really, really clear here about exactly what this means. This is not to say that your reading doesn't matter at all. Of course it does. And this is not to say that you shouldn't be reading large quantities of information. Of course you should. But it is to say that reading enormous, mountainous quantities of literature is all for naught. It's all entirely redundant if you're not applying the kind of quality of thinking necessary in order for you to make your way through the problems being presented. Which means that I've often told students, clients, friends, myself, I think I was told on a couple of occasions when I was doing my PhD that, there are those pieces of work that just have a citation for every sentence, and the reference list is like, 3 or 4 pages long in and of itself, and they feel as though they're really, really impressive pieces of work. But the fact of the matter is it starts to border on what's basically an annotated bibliography. This is like a Wikipedia entry at that point. You're not really doing anything profound. Whereas those pieces of work that happen to have far fewer references in them, but large quantities of meaningful, substantive, critical thinking, where you can tell that the person involved in this has actually taken the time to break apart the arguments that they're looking at, to try to understand their relevance, their applicability, their generalizability, what they actually might mean in today's circumstances. All of those things, those pieces of work tend to land a lot better. They hit a lot better. And more importantly than anything else, your own progress through your work will be that much faster and that much greater if you're doing more than just ingesting large quantities of literature, but rather developing your thinking, engaging in critical analysis, and making sure that the quality of your thought is at the right level.
I think one could see it another way or present it another way as it's really what really matters when it comes to the material that you're working with the reading that you're doing. What really matters is engagement and application. Those are two big words. What do I mean by that? So engagement, as you said, Dr. E, this is about showing that you are not just taking whatever's being presented, whether it's journal articles or textbooks or whatever, you're not just taking that at surface level, that you're actually asking the who, what, where, like how is this applicable? Is it still relevant? Is it relevant to this context? That you're not just taking everything at face value, that you're actually really engaging with it and questioning its validity and questioning whether or not it's applicable. So there's that engagement component, and then the way that you really show that engagement, at least one way you can show that, is by really applying what you are receiving in terms of theories and frameworks and models, applying that to solve specific problems. So that probably sounds a bit conceptual, so I'll just speak about an example from my past. When I was doing my MBA, I remember that we used to go to class, and in class we were presented with a bunch of theories and models and frameworks. If you've ever met anyone that's done an MBA, they just have a model or a framework for absolutely everything, for better or worse. And so we were receiving all of these models and frameworks and these theories, and what tended to happen with the weaker students was that in their assignments, what they were doing was kind of just rehashing and representing the model to the marker and saying, this is this model, this is what it's for, this is what it means, and then moving on. Whereas the stronger students were using the model, they were applying the model to solve a specific problem. So it might be a people management problem, or it might be a finance problem, but they're taking this problem and then they're taking this model, this framework that was prescribed by the professor, and then actually using it, really pushing that problem through the model. So applying that model. And that's really, really an important distinction, is the difference between just providing that annotated bibliography, as you said, Dr. E, where you're just shoving in a reference for each and every sentence that you present, as opposed to going deep and really applying something and really pushing it through the meat grinders, so to speak.
No, 1,000%. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, talking about my own personal experiences is not an MBA. Granted, I didn't necessarily have a model for everything. Okay, I did, but it was very philosophical and way more annoying. But still, because I was convinced I could explain your entire life. But putting that to one side, in my own experience, look, there's something that I always remind everybody I speak to. As I remind you sometimes, I remind the people we work with, I remind my fellow colleagues and the clients that we talk to and the students that we talk to and the people I engage with, because I'm repetitive and boring and say the same things over and over again, but still, I like to remind people that, look, there was a time I didn't speak the language. I mean, I didn't know how to speak English, let alone figure out how to do a bachelor's and then a master's and a PhD and what have you. There was a time when I was not just terrified by the idea of engaging in academia, but terrified by the language, and then that much more terrified by the workload implied by the literature that we had to read, right? Because the idea that I'd have to go through mountains and mountains and mountains of texts and books and what have you, and then understand all of that stuff in some way, shape or form, and then present all of that stuff in some way, shape or form was terrifying. I mean, it was baffling to me. One of the things that I found was a really, really helpful solution to that problem was precisely what we're talking about. That it wasn't the quantity of books that I was reading, but the quality of thought that was behind what reading I managed to do. Look, the fact of the matter is that anybody doing any kind of a degree or any kind of committed study for any period of time, you come to the realization that you're never going to read everything. You're just not. The fact is that even while you're reading this one book or this one text or this one paper that you think is really seminal, 500 others are being written. You're never going to get to the point where you read everything, nor should you. What we're saying is, and don't ever forget this, academia is the art of understanding more and more about less and less until you understand almost everything about almost nothing. And the emphasis there is on the understanding, not on your ability to be able to collate and collect literature. It's not a question of having a library and a bunch of shelves up here that's just covered in books, although kind of. But still, it's not about all of that. It's about the understanding that underlies the reading that you're doing. I'm reminded of a particular individual. I'm not saying everybody should aim to be a mathematical genius, but there's a famous story of a guy called Srinivasa Ramanujan. Srinivasa Ramanujan was a famous mathematician from India. And what made him famous was his ability to extrapolate really, really complex theories, mathematical analysis, number theory, infinite series, continued fractions, all of that stuff. He managed to infer and develop all of these complex theories from basic high school textbooks. And this is not to say that everybody should be trying to aim to be the greatest genius in the world, although I don't know why you wouldn't aim for that, but still, putting that to one side. What I am saying is that you can derive profound thinking from very, very simple texts, or profound thinking from very few texts. And again, this is not to say that you should not be reading more. I often tell people that the solution to most of your problems is just do more reading. It's not like you should not be reading more, but the reason that that's a solution is because in the course of your reading, you're making the effort to complete your understanding. It's not just that I've ingested this work and I've got it up on a shelf somewhere, but that I've truly understood what's being said. And any researcher will tell you, any researcher who's committed any serious amount of time to study will tell you the same thing. You can read one text, but you know full well that in order for you to genuinely understand it, you might have to read that same text again, and then again. And then again, so it's not even a matter of reading 500 of them. You might read that one 500 times. But the point is that you arrive at a quality of thought and understanding.
So in a nutshell, really what we're saying here is optimize or aim for understanding and depth as opposed to just having this mega reference list. Of course, you are going to come across some markers or assessors or professors who want to see a chunky reference list, but you're generally going to do better drilling in and really demonstrating understanding of a small handful of key theories and key concepts and applying them really well, as opposed to just going quantity. All right, so let's jump on to the second unspoken law of academia. And that is that the professors are more than just gatekeepers. They're fellow humans that you can and certainly should engage with. This sounds like a bit of a sermon. Dr. E, what do we need to know?
All right, it is a sermon, but don't expect anything like from a big speech on a mountain on a hill or what have you. Okay, if you push me, eventually that's exactly what's going to happen. But for now, let me try and focus our attention on this question of your professors not just being gatekeepers. Now, I think it's important to remember that even gatekeepers are still just human, right? So even though they may be the people holding the keys that determine your success or your progress, they're still just human beings, exactly as you said. They're still people that you ought to be engaging with for a number of reasons. Primary amongst those, maybe not the most important, certainly, but one of them is that these are the kinds of people who you are trying to network with because they're the ones in the positions you're trying to get to. That is to say, they understand the experience, they understand the journey, they understand what it is that you're trying to do, so that even if they seem unapproachable, in fact, let's be honest, sometimes they might even seem adversarial. Like sometimes you might have a situation where you're talking to a professor or a teacher or a supervisor or a committee member or whoever it may be who just doesn't seem like they are very interested in your situation, or maybe doesn't seem like they want to help you very much, or what have you. But the fact of the matter is, there's always a lot more to gain from engaging with them than there is to lose. You are in a much, much better position to understand what they're thinking, to understand what they're suggesting, to understand what their advice and their guidance is, than to just not engage in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. Remember that these people they're not gods of intelligentsia. If you've read some of their work, Yeah, and I can say that now. I've got a PhD too. Yeah, I can say that now. I've read some of their work. I know they're not gods of, not all of them in any case. Some of them, sure, but not all of them. They're not gods of intelligentsia. They're not the gods of academia. They're not the people who, as I said, hold all the keys and determine what success means, and that's the only thing that they're there for. They're much more than that, and they're much more accessible than you might think. So often the thing that's standing in your own way of engaging and deriving the kind of information that you could, or deriving the kind of advantages that you could from having those conversations, is you. It's just the fear of doing so. It's the second guessing. It's the hesitation and the wondering about whether or not it's worth it, or whether or not they're going to like it, or whether or not they're going to agree with you. Put all of those things outside of your mind. The only thing you're really trying to do here is, for lack of a better term, you're networking. I mean, I hate that phrase myself, but you're engaging with people who know more than you do and who are spending their time trying to get you to where you're trying to arrive at.
I think something that's useful to keep in mind, what we're proposing here is, shoot your shot, go ask the question, be the nerd that is kind of pestering the professor for more information. And often students feel like, isn't that just going to bother them? Isn't that just going to frustrate them? And I think what's useful to understand here, a perspective, is that in many cases, not in all, certainly this varies from institution to institution, but in many cases, professors are often dealing with really disengaged and sometimes just plain ungrateful students. And so when you come along and you demonstrate that you are genuinely interested in this thing that they're trying to convey to you, this knowledge that they're trying to impart upon you, that is really a breath of fresh air to that prof. And it can very often just completely reframe the potential relationship between the two of you. And so for even those professors that might seem a bit grumpy, a bit unapproachable and whatnot, very often once you just chip away at the enamel a little bit and just demonstrate that, hey, I'm an intellectually curious student and I'm genuinely interested in this topic that you have expertise on, professor, the whole relationship dynamic changes. And what you will often find is that they're actually quite keen to engage with you. And one little potential hack, or one way to really get into the sweet zone with the professor as quickly as possible, is to have a look at what their specific research interests are, and if possible, try to read some of their most recent published papers so that you can see exactly what excites them intellectually, what topics and potential research gaps are really attractive to them. And so if you can approach them with an understanding of that and potentially strike up a conversation around that, that really is a way to get them talking and a way to get the barriers down and to get connection with your professors. And to be clear, yeah, we're not saying that, oh, you do these things and the professors are going to be your best friend and your whole degree experience is going to be a breeze. Not at all. This is just about trying to make connections to people that you can learn from, people that you can have some sort of relationship with and benefit from based on their experience.
Facts, 1000%. I mean, look, at the end of the day, there's a couple of things to take into consideration here, and I don't want to make this negative in any way, shape, or form, but the fact of the matter is that in many cases, you're paying for this degree. This is not the cheapest of things that you could possibly engage in, and you're voluntarily doing so very often. You kind of engage in this willingly, like you put yourself in this situation. So these are people who, like you said, if you start to engage with their work and their background and what they wrote and what have you, you're starting to touch on their humanistic buttons, and you're not doing this because, you just want to kind of like stroke their ego. I mean, okay, to some degree, yes, sure, but everybody likes their ego stroked, why not? But that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because you want an actual conversation. I mean, if you were to go out with a friend of yours, you might want to get to know about their actual lives. You want to have an actual discussion with this individual and have an actual engagement. Who knows? In so doing, they might better understand what it is that you're trying to do, which you may not have eloquently or perfectly enunciated in the course of your work thus far or in the course of your discussions with them thus far. But the more you talk to them perhaps about theirs, or the more you talk to them perhaps about their own thoughts, and the more you show, as you said, your intellectual curiosity, the more successful that engagement in that relationship becomes, the more fruitful it becomes, and the more they might just willingly start making suggestions for you or start throwing up ideas that might be helpful to you, that you might occur to them when you're not even in the room. They might be reading something and, hey, look, I had a conversation with this person the other day. Maybe this is going to be helpful for them. I mean, look, at the end of the day, the important thing to remember is that there's a couple of things here. One, that the distance between yourself and your supervisor, your professor, your committee members, whoever it is, the authority figure that we're talking about, the distance between you and them is not intellect, it's time. That's all it really boils down to. What we're saying is that this person happened to have been born 5 or 6 or 7 years before you. We're saying this person happened to have started their journey in academia a couple years ahead of you. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to end up being in the exact same position. I mean, don't forget, they had their own supervisors too. They had their own professors, they had their own committee members, and they had to get to this position as well. And they looked up at them too and started to wonder how I get there. So that's the first thing that you want to bear in mind. It's not a gap of intellect. It's a gap of chronology. It's just time. So you take full advantage of the possibilities that present themselves in that relationship, bearing in mind that these are people who decide to spend their time helping advance your work. I mean, they're already there to try to help you out, so why not take advantage of that? There's a phrase that I always remind myself of, and I think I mentioned this previously. I'm in a kind of like weird samurai mood, but it's from the Hagakure, which is like this Japanese samurai text, right? But the idea is, they say it's like a tree with many roots. Like when you take advantage of the people around you and you take advantage of the authority figures and the knowledge that they can present to you and the experience that they have, whether they're approachable or otherwise, taking advantage of all of those things around you is like a tree in the mud with many, many roots. You're kind of reaching out and taking advantage of everything in your vicinity. Whereas when it's just you out here depending on yourself, it's just one individual's intelligence. It's like a stick that's just been stuck in the mud. Like it's not much hope of any growth here. So it's that. What you want to be is that tree with many, many roots, reaching out to all of the advantages and the advice that you could possibly get, rather than just being that stick in the mud. Not really much hope of growth, not really much hope of progress.
The Japanese proverbs are becoming a theme in these conversations. I'm enjoying it.
I don't know what to tell you, man. It's the reading, it's the literature. I don't know. Like sometimes you could take a break away from like academia, a little samurai reading, a little Miyamoto Musashi, a little Zen and decapitate. It's weird, but I don't know what to tell you. It's entertaining.
All right, so let's jump on to our third and final unwritten law, and that is that when it comes to conquering big mountains, balance is BS, but contrasts do matter. This sounds almost like something of a proverb, Dr. E. What is this all about? Why is balance BS, and what are contrasts, and why did they matter so much?
All right, let me break something down to you. First of all, those are bars, all right? It's not just a proverb. It's not just wisdom. These are bars. These are hip-hop bars is what that is, all right? Balance is BS in this case. It's absolutely true. Let me break that down for you in a way that kind of makes a little bit more sense or explains this further. Because, look, I don't want anybody to think that what we're suggesting is that you should be imbalanced, whatever that means, or that you should be unbalanced, whatever that means, and dedicating hours and hours and hours and hours to doing nothing but study or revision or reading or whatever it might happen to be. Because that's the kind of like the ideal image of what a student is supposed to be. That rise and grind attitude where you're doing nothing but one thing from 6 a.m. to midnight. Wait, hold on, I'm getting flashbacks. I feel like this is my life. Give me a second. No, I'm kidding. I'm not entirely kidding. But what I'm saying is, look, contrary to popular contemporary parlance, contrary to what everybody thinks about this idea of a work-life balance, I'm trying to kind of get a feel for how to enjoy one's life and then how to enjoy one's work as a regular balance, it tends to miss the trick, right? And it misses the trick for two particular reasons. Reason number one is that life just doesn't work like that all the time. The fact of the matter is that some people just don't have the space for them to have a quote unquote work-life balance, right? Having a work-life balance implies that there's enough in your life that you can split it relatively evenly between your work and your life. And I don't know if anybody else has noticed this modern economy. Nobody's got that kind of time. We all out here doing 2 or 3 jobs. I don't know what you mean by like balancing work and life. Tell my boss I need to balance work and life. Or tell our employers or tell like our bills we need to balance work and life. It don't work like that. So that's number one. The fact of the matter is that if you happen to have kids, for example, or if you happen to have people that you take care of, whether they're parents or partners or whatever else it might happen to be, if you have responsibilities outside of your commitment to your education, it's just very, very difficult for a person to say to you that you're supposed to take some time off in order to find the balance in your life. It's just not feasible, not meaningful. That's problem number one. But problem number two on the other side of this is that it tends to miss the other trick, which is to say that, look, for some people, their work is their life. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I don't mean that in the sense of like they've got nothing else going on in their lives, or they've got nothing else, hobbies that can entertain them, or that they could spend hours doing. What I mean is that some people happen to have found that sweet spot where they actually enjoy their work. Like, I don't know what to tell you, but I could podcast all day. Like this, we do this all day long. Like, this is fun for me. So what I'm saying is that occasionally you get lucky enough that, and ideally that will be the case in academia, but you get lucky enough that you find yourself in a situation where what you're doing, where the work that you're engaged in is what's giving you a sense of a joie de vivre, like a joy for life. That's precisely what's doing that for you. And that's not a bad thing. Like, it's not necessarily a terrible thing to think that I want to spend all day long engaged in my work. Maybe that's what gives you joy. I mean, look, I'll just speak for myself as an honest truth. When I discovered, like when I got into my master's degree and then I got into my PhD and what have you, I didn't want to do anything else. And it wasn't because I was obligated to do it. It wasn't because somebody made me do it. It wasn't because there was some expectations or standards that were set upon me that I had to reach or anything like that. It was because I genuinely felt like my life had more meaning the more work that I was doing, that I was enjoying what I was doing so much. I didn't want to do anything else. That being said, so while work-life balance kind of tends to miss the trick a little bit, that being said, that doesn't mean you should sell yourself short and then believe that because I want to work so hard, or because I want to achieve what I want to achieve, or because I want to get to the level of success I want to get to, that therefore the only way for me to work is sat in front of a computer screen, head down, typing and reading something. Like, that's just, you're just selling yourself short. The idea that you're not working, or that your brain isn't still engaging in the thoughts that you're trying to understand when you're not in front of the computer screen, it's just unfair. Like, on you, like, you're just selling you short. The fact of the matter is that work continues when you're away from the computer screen. So permit yourself the space to engage in work outside of quote unquote work. So maybe sometimes it makes sense for you to think about your thesis or your work or your studies or your book or whatever it is that you're engaged in. Maybe it makes most sense for you to take yourself away from the screen and do that on the beach. Go for a walk, maybe go for a run, maybe lift some weights, maybe don't lift some weights, maybe punch something, not someone, something, maybe that. But you know what I'm saying, like that kind of stuff. Like, maybe you want to engage in some activity that takes you away from the screen and takes you away from the typical expected forms of study or work or whatever it might happen to be, to allow your brain and allow yourself the space to think in a different way. And that is always a good first step.
I think so often the first thing to go when people are overwhelmed by work, or in this case we're treating work and study as the same thing, first thing that tends to go is physical health, because it's so easy to make that excuse of, well, I just don't have time to go to the gym. I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to do that. And it's understandable, right? It's, you look at option one, sit in front of the computer and look like you're being productive, you're typing, you're reading, whatever the case may be, versus option two, be in the gym and you're not studying. So it's easy to look at that and go, well, I should be studying, I should be working on my dissertation or thesis, or whatever the case may be. But as you said, Dr. E, is that these things are not mutually exclusive. You can't just drum on in front of your computer all the time. You have to take that step away, and you have to allow yourself to just at least get out of the office, or at least get away from your computer and have that contrast, have some change of scenery. And that allows you, that enables your mind to just kind of get some oxygen, some space to go, okay, let me try approach this challenge or this struggle or this thing I'm working on. Let me try approach it from a different angle. Let's try and think about it differently in this way or that way. So you need to remember that stepping away from your computer not having your fingers on the keyboard doesn't mean that you're not working, that you're not making progress. In fact, it can be the biggest accelerator if you can strike that. I'm going to use the balance swear word, but if you can strike that balance between on the keyboard and off the keyboard, such that you give your mind and your brain enough time to think about things in a sort of high focus mode, and then in a sort of more sort of exploratory mode and in more of a creative thinking mode, that can be really, really powerful. It brings to mind this African story or folktale that I'm probably going to butcher, but it's a story of this monkey that finds a calabash fruit, which is just to think of it as a big fruit if you don't know what a calabash is. And it wants to get the seeds inside. It wants to grab the seeds and eat them because that's what monkeys like. And so it sticks its hand in and it grabs a whole fistful of seeds, and that's, jackpot. He's got exactly what he wanted, but then he can't get his hand out because he's just stuck. He's just pulling and pulling and pulling, but his hand's full of these seeds. And so he just gets stuck there, and he has exactly what he wants. He's so close, but he just can't get out. And what use is that? He's going to starve to death. And so the idea there is that sometimes you do need to if you're wrestling with this problem, or you're wrestling with this paragraph or the sentence that you can't get out, or reading some portion of a journal article and you're thinking, what on earth is this person saying? Sometimes the best thing you can do is just step away from it. Just get that contrast. Go for that run or go for that walk, whatever works for you. Just get away from the thing that you're struggling on, and then you'll give yourself some oxygen and the ability to approach it from a new angle, and that's where the success will lie.
It's facts. It's absolute facts. I mean, there's a couple of things. One, I love that there's a proverb competition going on here. So we've got a little Japanese, little African proverb competition going. I feel like if that's the case, you might be winning this, but still, we'll put that to one side. That's number one. Number two, I mean, there's kind of a short-sightedness here. I don't know what anybody thinks sleep is. Like, what do you think you're doing when you're sleeping? Like, I get that's, 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 hours away from the desk. Like, calm down. Don't panic. I get it. We're not working. And I'm kind of speaking to myself here because, I'll be honest with you, I'm the worst at this. I'm not a fan of sleep. I'm not a fan of taking time away from my work. I know this is more about me than it is anything else. It's more my therapy session. That's fine. Get over that for a second. But the fact of the matter is, that's really what you're doing in sleep. The idea is you're taking your brain away and taking yourself away from your work to allow your brain and allow yourself to digest everything that you've just taken in that day. And when you wake up the next morning, you suddenly might understand a little bit more. It suddenly might be more embedded. You might have a deeper thought about the stuff that you started engaging in yesterday. I mean, just the fact of the matter is that these things take time. I don't know what to tell you, but you read something today, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to understand it by the time you get to the end of the sentence. You might have to wait until tomorrow morning for that sentence to really land or for it to really hit you. I mean, I don't know how many people we've met in the course of our lives who hear a proverb or who hear a piece of advice or who hear a suggestion when they're 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, and that stuff doesn't land until they're 20-something. They're like, oh, that's what they meant. Yeah, it took you a decade to get there. But you thought you were going to read some of the most complex texts in the world and go, okay, but I should get this today. I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that. This is going to take you a minute. Look, I've got, if we're doing this proverb competition, there's a story from Buddhist, kind of not mythology, but Buddhist tale on enlightenment, which is that there's this story of this man who spends all day long in meditation. I mean, he just sat there all day, 24 years of his entire life, sat in solid, hardcore meditation. My man's desperately trying to get to enlightenment. He knows exactly what the path is. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's not wasting any time doing anything else, right? No breaks. Rise and grind, man. Rise and grind. But we're rising and grinding towards enlightenment. That's all he's doing all day long. And he sat there and meditating and meditating and meditating and meditating, and nothing's happening. So at some point, he decides to kind of slightly switch this up, and he's humming his meditations. And then somebody walks past him, just a tourist or what have you, just strolls past him and whistles the tune he's humming. And as a result of his whistling, gets enlightened. I'm like, all right, really, bro? Really, bro? But it's that. The idea is that it doesn't land the way that you think it does. It's not as a consequence of you just drumming away, as you said a moment ago, at the concept or drumming away at the idea until eventually kind of you chip away at it enough and you start to understand what it works. It's just not how thinking works. It's not how understanding works. It's not how depth and quality of thought works. It's not even how endurance works. It's a matter of knowing yourself and knowing the situation enough to say to yourself, okay, just because I'm not necessarily staring at the screen right now doesn't mean I'm not thinking. That the idea is, in terms of the work-life balance that we struck up a moment ago, that you want to find yourself in a position where those thoughts that are work-oriented, or that are to do with the thesis or the dissertation or the essay or the whatever it is that you might be working on that you're studying, that those things are carried with you throughout the day, that you conduct yourself accordingly and you allow those thoughts to feed themselves into every aspect of your life, so that when you're sitting there washing the dishes, you are washing the dishes, but you're remembering the piece of writing that you read. Or when you go for a walk, you go for a walk and you're remembering that text that you were reading. Or when you go for a run and you're in the gym and you're counting the number of reps, it's reminding you of that quantitative piece of work that you were doing. Like whatever else is going on, these things are going to be in your mind, and they're going to make their own growth and their own development, and they're going to arrive at the point that they need to in their own time. You need to understand that you're not going to get there by just doing this one thing over and over and over again, but that you can apply this across the board in a much more balanced way. So we came back around to it. All right, cool. I'll stop. I won't do that anymore.
It's, I guess this is part of the reason we have such entertaining and interesting shower thoughts, right? It's that for many people, it's the only time of the day that they're not glued to a phone or a screen or involved in some sort of intellectually demanding task. So that's when the mind goes, let's approach this problem that's been running in the background. Let's approach it from a different angle. It's really, really important to get those contrasts on. And I think this is particularly important when you're dealing with some complex problem, when you're beating on the drum, trying to figure out, like, how do I crack this code? When you're trying to deal with those sorts of problems and you're just hitting a brick wall, and that is where you need to get the contrast. You need to change your environment, and you need to step away and not feel guilty about stepping away, because you're not going to step away for 3 weeks. We're just talking about a little walk. We're not talking about a huge commitment yet.
Yeah, and this is what I was saying to you a moment ago. I mean, I think you do yourself the credit of thinking that just because I'm not sat in front of the computer, that didn't mean that my brain switched off. I mean, I've said this to people in the past, that, there's this kind of vague notion that it's only when I'm sat on the beach and staring up at the sky that I'm thinking philosophically, which is this absurdity that implies that the rest of your life you're kind of just bumbling around and smashing into stuff because there's no actual thought going on in your head. It's just absurd. And the same thing is true in reverse. It's not to say that because I'm not reading the text right now, or because I'm not typing my essay or my paper right now, or because I'm not sending the emails that I'm supposed to be sending right now. Yes, I feel guilty. I know. I'll send those emails. I'll get back to you guys eventually. I apologize. I'm here. It's his fault. Don't blame me. But the point is, just because I'm not doing these things right now doesn't mean I'm not doing them. It's just that the doing of it doesn't always have to look exactly the same. So just because I'm, engaging in philosophical thought when I'm staring at the sky and thinking about what all of this means out here, it doesn't mean I'm not engaging in philosophical thought when I'm washing the dishes or when I'm going for a run or where I'm at the gym. I still am. It's just in a different form, in a different version, and to a different end. And the same thing applies with your own work. You give yourself the credit of understanding that if you are genuinely committed to what it is that you're doing, that commitment will carry through everything that you do. It's not just when you're writing, but in every aspect of your life.
Dr. E, as always, it has been enlightening, to say the least, and I'm sure that many of our viewers and listeners have got some good takeaways, or at least some good proverbs from this discussion.
Hey, it's light work. I mean, if this is what we can do in like 35, 40 minutes, imagine what happens with a whole session. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just throwing that out there, but like, I'm just saying.
All right, so that wraps up this episode of the Grad Coach Podcast. Remember, you can get access to loads of free resources, including detailed tutorials, templates, and much, much more over on the Grad Coach blog. You can find the link to that in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please do remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons, and you'll definitely want to check out this one next. I'll see you there.